sharing.
Well, Rich was just trying to share something, so just
Okay.
give us 1
I
second.
will.
Yeah.
I will stand back.
All right. Well, I'll mail it to you, Daryl. But it's a WebEx room of everybody wearing the exact same shirt as our boss. He was freaked out because, well, I'll make a quick slide. Everywhere he looked, it was always like looking in the mirror.
It's a little terrifying.
Yeah. All right. You can take the screen back.
Okay, well, Clemens, you want to just try sharing slides?
I just wanna try if you let me.
And we will let you. There you go.
Yes. It does multi-monitor. I'm impressed.
I'm still.
Okay.
Wait.
Can you see?
Yes, we see your screen. Yep.
Okay. Let me just go into. Oops. That is. Okay. I will figure it out how to do the right screen. Thank you.
All right. We'll wait a minute or two for our new AD to come up, and then we can start. Does anybody want to take notes? I don't think so, but I'll do it. Daryl's going to run the slides remote. Can remote folks hear me clearly?
I can.
Yes.
Okay, good enough. Yeah, we still got some people coming in, and we'll have some spare time at the end of the session. Okay.
I'm going to mute your loud keyboard for a moment, Clemens.
All right, a couple people. Stop. Here's Mike. All right. Welcome to the HTTP API working group. If this is not your destination, please deboard the plane now. My name is Rich. I'm one of the co-chairs. Daryl, with the cool mic on the top, is the other co-chair. Clemens Remote will be one of our presenters. I think almost all of our presenters are remote these days. You want to start, Daryl?
Indeed, yes.
Okay. Anyone interested in helping take the notes? Anyone? Bueller? Okay, I'll do it, which is how it's usually gone.
So we are midweek, so I believe all of you, or most of you, should have already seen this note well. As a reminder, by participating, you agree to follow all the IETF processes and policies, and you know the drill around patents and patent applications. Also, please note that we have a code of conduct, and you all agree to work respectfully with other participants. If you are in person, please make sure that you sign in to Meet Echo. And please, if you are remote, make sure you keep your audio and video off unless you're chairing or presenting, and use of a headset is strongly recommended. And please join the queue use Meet Echo to join the queue. Okay. There are links here to the agenda and other issues if you're having issues with the tooling. Rich has already mentioned about note takers, and Rich volunteered. Thank you, Rich. Before we continue with this agenda, is there any agenda bashing that anybody would like to do? Closer to the mic. I can do that.
I'll say a couple words on the ADs before we start the real work, so not even worth a bullet point. Okay, so we'll take the agenda as written. Thank you. So March is when the IETF turns over its leadership. We want to thank Francesca, our outgoing AD. This was, you were here from the beginning, right? So this was an unusual working group, the way it was created. And we, at the start, we had more than half the people had never been to an IETF before. And it has, doesn't have a charter that matches the way many others are structured. So I want to thank Francesca for helping us guide us through the creation. Our incoming area director is Mike Bishop, who is, do you want to say anything other than hi? Why don't you just stand up so people know? One of the primary reasons we have area directors is if you find that the chairs are not doing something or good, or they're in particular doing something bad, you can complain to the area directors or area directors. So Mike is our assigned AD. And so thank you, Francesca. Welcome, Mike. If there's no comments from the floor, we can proceed.
Okay, so let us get it started. Well, the good news, we have a new document rolled out. RFC 9745 is the deprecation HTTP response header field. This has been a long journey. It was one of our opening documents. It went through a lot of revisions and a lot of opinions, and then finally emerged out the other side. So that is excellent news. The other document that is very nearly almost is our API catalog that is in the RFC queue. And I expect that to be coming out anytime soon, although I think it's in a bundle. So it's waiting on stars to align before it comes out. There were a number of documents that were updated since the last IETF 121. One of those is link hint, and I will apologize. I have not gone back and reviewed those changes. Would it be possible that Mr. Nottingham is in the room to speak to the changes that are in that document?
No, the rumor going around is that he's actually been ill and taken to his hotel room since yesterday, because nobody has seen him in the past full day.
Okay, well then I would encourage folks to take a look at the changes to link hints and provide feedback upon that document so that we can get that moving forward. I know there were some comments that Herbert Von Semple had posted in the chat. So if we can get more feedback on that, that would be great. Okay, next up is the legacy named REST API media types, and I call it that because it is really just the open API media type, and Roberto was kind enough to provide us with an update here, and I'm just going to see if I can figure out how to run a slideshow from a browser here. Yeah, that seemed to work. That is not the right document at all. That's the later one. Let me drag the right screen in here, which is this one. So I said to Roberto, considering it was rather late for our European friends, that I would walk through his slides for him. So there has been some updates to this document. Just to review the intent of this is a registration of an IANA media type registration. It isn't actually a specification for the OpenAPI description. It is just the IANA registration with the goals of increasing interoperability so that people can actually describe their HTTP responses with an appropriate media type and allow doing content negotiation based on the version of the OpenAPI description. It fits very nicely along with some of our other efforts like the API catalog, because you use a link relation in an API catalog to a service description. And then when you retrieve that, you would get the media type saying that this is application / open API plus JSON or plus YAML. It is trying to align a number of different things because OpenAPI also uses JSON schema. Yeah, it relies on JSON schema, but JSON schema does not have a registered media type. The intent was that this REST API media types document would register both OpenAPI and JSON schema, but we've had a number of challenges around JSON schema, I think largely around fragments, fragment identifiers, and vocabularies and dialects and things like that. So what that means is that this document now just focuses on the OpenAPI plus JSON and the OpenAPI plus YAML, which we believe that we are very nearly almost complete on this document. And we will attempt to either do the schema plus JSON here, or I believe the JSON schema community are also looking at alternative ways to register this media type. And we have already registered application / YAML, and as it says here, the YAML LD has moved into the W3C JSON LD working group, and YAML was published as RFC 9512. The open issues remain. There was a proposal to have a media type parameter called object that could be used to reference documents that were not complete OpenAPI descriptions, but were just portions of an OpenAPI description. And the object parameter would tell you what portion of the OpenAPI description was contained in that either JSON or YAML document. This is a practice that the OpenAPI the OpenAPI initiative is trying to discourage people from creating these fragment documents, partial documents, as they're kind of a pain to parse. And so the current thinking is we are not going to support this object parameter. But obviously, if any folks have opinions on whether they think that it is a valid thing to have a media type that can point to just a piece of an OpenAPI description, let us know. There was also a comment that had been added. Well, really, it was only in the FAQ to the document saying that this would only support 3.0 and 3.1 and not 2. We've had feedback from numerous people saying, no, it should support all the versions. That's why we have content negotiation. And I think the only thing to resolve there is there's some places in this document where we point to explicit versions. And, well, we weren't pointing to the 2.0 version. So that probably needs to be resolved. So with those two items, I think we can close up the issues, and then we would be left to decide what we're going to do with JSON schema. But we'll leave that for conversation either on GitHub or on the list. Mike, I didn't see you there in the queue.
Mike Bishop, just quick clarifying question. If you can go back to slide 4.
Yes.
So the the draft here that it relies on, is that the RFC 9512 or is that a different draft that is still unpublished?
And 9512 is just the IANA registration of application/YAML.
Okay.
And the suffix, the plus YAML.
Okay. And the ID.IETF HTTPAPI YAML media types?
Is RFC 9512.
Okay. Thank you. That's what I was going.
Paul, yes. Okay. Thank you. Any other comments, thoughts? I think we should get those last couple of issues wrapped up and then bring this to working group last call on the list. You agree, Rich?
Yeah. So when you say on the list, you mean before the next IETF meeting? That's the intent.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Cool. Okay. You're going to get tired of hearing from me. Now I have to go find that window that I found before, but there we go. This one. Okay. No, this is this is the one that I presented in Dublin. Let me use the there we go. Look at that. Magic. Okay. So changes since IETF 121. There was feedback from various folks. We've had quite a bit of feedback, and it's most appreciated. When defining fields using structured headers, you kind of talk about things being an item or a list or a parameter, which are fairly generic terms. And the only really standout thing is that they have a capital letter for list and item and parameter. And some folks had called out the fact that they didn't find it very obvious that we were referring to structured fields, lists, items, and parameters. And so we just scattered around a number of references to structured fields and added some term definitions to make it more obvious that we're not using ABNF to define the syntax anymore. We're using the structured fields terms in order to describe those. There's a window parameter that defines a period of time for which the quota is applicable. It used to just say it was a non-negative integer. And there was some discussion around, well, what does a window of 0 mean? And we determined that there were two possible meanings of what that was, neither of which were particularly helpful. So we decided to say that it needed to be non-zero. Positive. Thank you, Karsten. Must be a positive integer. That's a shorter way of saying it. Perfect. There's a remaining parameter. It was mistakenly not identified as being a required field. It now states it's a required field. So those are minor little things that were changed. The other bigger change is based on feedback from 121. We introduced a number of problem types to further qualify what were the reasons why somebody was rate limited. The most obvious one of these is the default case, which is quota exceeded. And so there's now an IANA registration for the problem type called quota exceeded with a extension property called violated policies that allows you to indicate which policies the quota exceeded. This is an optional response body that people can provide. That is the first one of the problem types we created. The second one was an ability for a server, if it so chooses, to indicate that that quota that we previously told you that you could have, you can't have it at the moment because we have temporarily reduced your capacity. The idea being that when people are analyzing why they are getting rate limited, they will know that, well, it's not because we are using an excessive amount of capacity. It's just because the server was having some issues, and for service protection reasons, that quota was reduced. And the third reason that was introduced was abnormal usage detected. The indication here is that through some kind of heuristics, the server has identified that you ran out of quota, not likely because you are just using the service too much. You're just using it in a way that it really wasn't intended. As an example, you have some service that is, showing scores for some sporting event, and the quota is over a period of 10 minutes, and your quota gets used up in the first 4 seconds. That's probably not what the client intended, as it's desperately trying to check whether or not the score changed. Obviously, again, this is optional for a server to provide, and there are certain security concerns around whether you really want to advertise this kind of information to clients. But in an environment where you deem it secure, this is an option. Feedback on whether these are the right set of problem types or whether there are other ones would be most appreciated. And the next item is, currently the specification includes different quota units. It includes requests, content bytes, and concurrent requests. This is a proposal that is not yet in the current draft for introducing a new unit called cost, which goes a little bit against the intent of the intent of this specification in general is to make it easier for people to write generic client code that can do the rate limiting, and saying something has a cost is doesn't really convey something in an interoperable way. There will need to be some kind of communication between the developer writing the client code and the service to go, well, what do you mean exactly by cost? And how do I measure how much a particular request costs? But we have seen this. I know APIs that expose kind of database queries will sometimes do this. And more commonly these days, tokens in AI, LLM based systems use this notion of the number of tokens that you're able to get in some time period. And so it would be necessary for clients to kind of calculate how many tokens they are going to communicate. Are going to send over the wire to know whether or not they can do it. So it's a little bit more coupling between client and server, but I think there are valid use cases for this cost. It always reminds me of that agile technique of how long will this take, and you measure it in gummy bears. And last but not least, I have actually attempted to do an implementation of this to try and ensure that we didn't just write up something that is not feasible to actually go and implement or doesn't make sense. The general idea is that a client would have some kind of generic code that processes both these policy fields and the service limit fields. And then before making a new request, it would calculate what it believes to be the cost of that new request, and then would determine whether or not the costs of that new request meet the limits that are available for the service. And if there are any limits that are not met, then the client can choose to defer sending that request until the quota period is up, or it can find some other way of sending the request that meets the criteria set out by the server. This is a very simplistic example. I wanted to show a little bit more of a complex example using this notion of the partition key. And so in this case, the scenario is the partition key is based on the HTTP method, with the idea being that you have a certain quota for reads and a certain quota for writes. And when you create your generic rate limiter instance here, we pass in a lambda that calculates that partition key. And so we look at the request and we say, okay, well, the request method, we turn it into a string. Because we're using structured fields, we turn it into a base 64 string and put it into the servlet limit field. It's kind of this, because this test is kind of mixing the role of the server and the client, it's a little bit mixed up, but hopefully you can get the intent here. And we can calculate the policy, find out whether we have enough limits available to do a read. After we successfully make that call, we would then apply those costs that we'd previously calculated to reduce the remaining costs in the limiter. And then we repeat the same thing for the post method and do the same thing, apply the costs. If folks have opinions on that object model, the way of exposing that, or if they want to take a look at it and try implement it in another language, that would be amazing. I think, there is this whole idea that having two working and interoperable implementations is a goal. It would be great if we could get some additional implementation feedback rather than just the authors who are implementing this. And with that, that covers it. Does anybody have any questions?
Mike Bishop, the one API that I'm familiar with that uses cost as their rate limiting metric, one useful piece of that is that the server tells you its perspective on how much the request cost as part of its response. Is there an element of the rate limit field currently that where the server could say not only how much have you used, but how expensive was this request? And if not, do we maybe need one?
There isn't, other than you could potentially do you might be able to do a diff between the last limit and the current one, but that assumes that you're the only client hitting that partition. If there are other clients hitting that partition, you wouldn't necessarily know that. Yeah, that's for cost, that's a good call out. For things like content bytes, it didn't make any sense. For requests, it didn't make any sense. But for cost, yeah.
Even for those, I almost wonder. I mean, obviously optional; it's less useful there, but it would be interesting to highlight when the server's perspective on any of those metrics was different than the client's.
Yeah, it's interesting for concurrent requests.
Yeah.
Cool. Yep. Thank you. Marius?
I think overall this draft is in a pretty good shape. I especially like the new problem types. Um, although I have to say I have a bit of hard time wrapping around my head about exact usages of the abused rate limit problem type. I'm not sure what its exact name was, but yeah, I personally don't exactly understand when I would use this one, but this might also just be my experience with the services that I implement and administer. So if other people think that this is a really helpful one, then I'm also fine with keeping it. But just my personal experience that I wouldn't know where to use this and when.
Okay, it's good feedback. I will make an effort to try and socialize this a little bit more with the different communities. As I mentioned on the list, we've started to try and get more input solicited from the Open API initiative community. So I'll see if I can get other feedback with it from folks as to whether or not they think that that would be a useful thing to have or not. I
Perfect.
always remember that there's one of the API management vendors out there, and they do a lot of talks about rate limiting, and the comment that they make is the most common scenario that they see for hitting rate limiting is developers rate limiting themselves because they made a loop and they screwed up somewhere completely unintentionally. So, but yeah, okay.
Perfect.
Cool. Okay. Let's make those. There we go. Okay.
So, Daryl, so how much writing work do you still think is needed?
I mean, if depending on whether we want to add a new property to return cost, and as Hans, you mentioned, some APIs return those costs in the response payload. I don't. I if we go out and get feedback, if there's no feedback that says we think that there's additional changes necessary, then I think we're good on this doc. It depends on whether people think there are further changes required. There are no open issues anymore on this repo other than editorial things. So.
All right. So the charge to the working group is to really consider the point that Mike had raised. If we want to, add this response field or structured response field, and if not, maybe by or at the next IETF meeting, we'll move this into working group last call. As the co-chair, I want to thank Daryl, who really picked up the ball and cleaned up lots of stuff and did a lot of work and is obviously a co-author of this now. So I'll be handling all of the process stuff. Okay.
Cool. And so now I want to hand it over to Clemens to give a proposal to this working group as a new document to potentially, or document or set of documents potentially. And this, I think, is one of those issues that has been a very long-standing issue in the larger community around some of the challenges around JSON schema. And so, and it does affect folks building APIs quite extensively. So curious to the group's feedback here. And I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to grant you the screen, Clemens, and it's all yours.
All right, let me make sure that I have the right screen here. I have too many, obviously. This looks like the right one. Okay. I'm going to talk about the contents of this folder in this repo. So there's a number of documents that I'm bringing, and I will explain what that is. The name of this is called New JSON Schema in quotes, so that shall indicate I'm not insistent on naming on the name of it. It's the point is it's a thought experiment to a large degree, even though it's a large one, and it's addressing some or trying to address some issues that we are having in our team. So let me just go and give you some short context of who I am and where I'm coming from. I work for Microsoft. I am the lead architect for the messaging services that we have: Event Grid, Event Hub, Service Bus, Stream Analytics, and Microsoft Fabric Event Streams, all of which are building fairly heavily on open standards. We're the team, I would say, in the messaging space that's driving most standardization. And we're directly into driving Oasis MQP. We have been involved in MQTT. We're helping with CNCF cloud events and a new effort called CNCF X Registry. And X Registry is a schema registry, amongst other things. And so we've been, and the goal that we have with X Registry in this context of messaging, asynchronous messaging, is to build effectively a type-safe pipeline, very similar to what you guys are doing with OpenAPI. So we have fairly similar playing field. And we have been trying to, for the products that we're building, we've been trying to write code generation to build these type-safe clients. And I've also been doing this in open source repos to kind of run ahead of our product, and to also kind of integrate with X Registry and showing people what X Registry is for. What we made the decision for the product side inside of Microsoft to not use JSON schema, but rather to lean on the Avro schema, because that's a well-known factor in data, but also because JSON schema ends up, like in our experience, being non-toolable because of the inherent complexity. So I'm not going to go and spend too much time on the JSON schema as it exists part, but I have 2 slides for it. What's an observation that we have is that the de facto standard for JSON schema is draft 07. That seems what everybody's using. I went and looked at schemastore.org, which is kind of a hodgepodge of all kinds of schemas for either official ones or non-official ones for common JSON documents, configuration documents, etc. And the overwhelming majority, like 90%, is all draft 07 or draft 04. And it seems like the newer drafts, 2019, 2020, have very inconsistent or very little uptake. And if you look at what's being used for the purpose where JSON schema is used for in OpenAPI, but also in what we need for our purposes, there's a subset of it that's useful. And then if I compare this to, let's say, Avro schema, there's also a few things that I am missing. And then if I look at this further out, there is pieces that I'm missing, for instance, for integration with LLMs, where I would like to have better data quality and depth. So I've been looking at this from a perspective of a refactoring of JSON schema, so not abandon much in terms of what's there, but really factor it in a way that I can go and pick a piece that I can use for code generation for really as a data definition language, because right now it is really more a way to do pattern matching validation on JSON schemas, but it's not really a good data definition language. So So the goals of what I'm going to present to you is it's a data structure definition language at the core. It defines names and namespaces. It has a richer primitive type system than JSON has, that are effectively overlaid over JSON. I have an extended set of compound types, so there's sets and maps and tuples, which can all be modeled on top of JSON. And then I've redone effectively the way how you go and share and reuse types or data definitions that align more with common programming language constructs. So this is explicitly designed to map into from languages like TypeScript and JavaScript and C# and Java, etc. And then there's a set of companion specs that goes with it. And these companion specs that extend the core allow then for further features that you can turn on if you like. So there's a mechanism by which you can go and turn things on for your either meta schema or for your documents. And I'm also making the import of external schemas explicit. Today in JSON schema, you have kind of this $ref, which is a amalgamation of internal JSON references and external references, and that's also ends up being very brittle because if you have a complex spec that's kind of all strewn across the document, so I'm making that an explicit mechanism. And I'm taking, and that's one of the most important changes. I'm also taking the pattern matching validation rules. So the conditional composition constructs, any of, all of, one of, if then else and not, I have factored them out into a completely separate spec, and you don't have to go and deal with them if you don't want to. So into the examples, sorry for the walls of text for introduction. The core is basically the parts of JSON schema that most devs care about. I'm tightening up. So first I'm tightening up the rules. So I'm making type explicitly required. There's no implication here anymore. And every type must be named. So I have an explicit rule that every type must have a name, and the name can appear either, as you see here for the root object, as in a name property, or as you will see in a moment, it can also be a key inside of a namespace. I've also expanded very significantly the set of primitive data types. So there's now there's several numeric data types. There's date, there's datetime, and there's also types like URIs and JSON pointers that are effectively formatting rules and sizing rules that are overlaid. But those are kind of mapping straight up and down to most common programming languages, so that you don't have to go and define, use two fields to define as a restriction on something like an int32. What I'm also doing in the primitive type system, I have a slide on that in a moment, is I'm defining rules for numeric types like decimal and int64 to be encoded as strings, because of the inherent restrictions today on JSON per se, that puts effectively a limit on the precision of a number to doubles in IEEE 754. So, but otherwise, it looks this JSON schema that I'm presenting, the core, looks and feels like JSON schema, but it has a fewer features. So I'm cutting a lot of features out. Effectively, all the validation features are out, all the conditional composition features are cut out, and then I'm adding effectively better type support and a few other things that we're going to talk about now. The extended primitive types are part of the core. These are effectively all the types that I'm showing here on the side. And there are some types with type-specific annotations. For instance, decimal has a precision in the scale. I have some, and then there are serialization rules effectively that come with every type. All of the primitive type map down to number or strings. I'm using the type foundation that exists inside of JSON, but I'm basically creating a type model that sits on top of it. That is something that I find enormously useful for knowing, what the right type is to map for, especially because number is so broad in JSON. That seems like at least for us, it's a very useful way. And then we have these, especially for decimal. Decimal is in JSON a bit of a trap because the JSON spec suggests that it's okay to use an IEEE 754 double to back the values. You're then running into having to use using a double, and that double is not representing correctly what decimal numbers are. And so therefore, I am forcing through the serialization rules the decimal to be a string and to correctly represent the a decimal and not lose any precision. So that's all kind of in that core spec on the extended primitive types. Reusable types are shown here. You can also see the namespace construct. So that's what I call defs. So defs is effectively a namespace. You're going to see another example of that with nesting in a moment. I'm also not sure whether this should really be $defs, or whether it should be definitions, because definitions is, it's the older draft, but it's clearly more popular. And I think even OpenAPI is using definitions rather than $defs, does it? So what you see is effectively an external definition here, an address, and then that address is being referenced using this $ref mechanism. I have constrained $ref to only be allowed within the same document. And it is only allowed in this form, where effectively the $ref is a schema unto itself, and that is then being used effectively as the type definition. So this is the only way how you can go and use $ref. $ref in the current version of schema can, practically speaking, be used to point to mostly everything inside of the document. And I'm making the restriction that it can only point to a defined type in the $def section, and it cannot point to anything that's external. External is separate. That's through the import mechanism. So that makes it much clearer and much less ambiguous and complicated to go and create these cross references. Because they arguably, like if you say address here, and then you have you do a $ref that sits at this level, then you don't have a way to go and have a description or some other metadata that's specific for this field. So it always needs to be just basically doing the reference to the type as I do this here. So there's too much flexibility, I would say, in the current JSON schema to allow basically the use of or what is being allowed in $ref. Sorry, it's super early in the morning. You see what namespace here. You see the namespace concept. That is something that is being practiced today in JSON schema, but not really formally defined. I'm making this an explicit construct. So in $defs, there is now a formal definition for what a namespace is. The namespace is an explicit construct inside of $defs, and it's effectively established by the absence of a type definition. And with this, you can go and disambiguate, obviously, colliding types. I'm also using this as the foundation for the import mechanism, but it's pretty obvious how this works for referencing. $import is an extension, so you have to go and activate import effectively to be able to use it. And import is allowing you to take any existing schema that's external and pull it into a namespace. You can also pull it into the default namespace if you want to. But here I'm showing that I'm taking this definition set and I'm pulling it into a namespace inside of another document, and then all of its definitions become available for local referencing. So instead of doing kind of these cross references across documents from everywhere to everywhere, I'm saying no, you have to go and take the document, you have to go and put it into this place where you have $import. Now it becomes effectively local, and now you're going to do a local reference to it. To make it just you make a definition at one place of where you want to have that import, and then otherwise everything is as if it were local, and the namespace kind of gives you the scoping for it. So that's that definition concept. I'm also allowing and discussing shadowing. Because it's now becoming a local part of the schema, you can also shadow definitions. So you can go in people, you can go and do an import of this here, but I could also go and now redefine person if I wanted to, or I can go and do a definition of person that has some extra fields, because what is being used for the code generator, what's being used for validation is this document with this being inserted, but that is being treated kind of as a local copy. So that's why shadowing is allowed, because I'm working basically with a local copy of it. In terms of dealing with not polymorphism, but with reuse of definitions, I have a model that has two keywords called abstract and extends, because it's very popular in use of a JSON schema to model hierarchies of classes that are coming out of whatever the programming languages are. And I think that the greatest desire that people have is to be able to reuse existing definitions in other contexts and then go and enrich them. And that's what I'm trying to help with here, where you have a definition here where you can see address base, and that is abstract. And if you then want to go and reuse those definitions in a street address and a post office box address, you have this extends where you are then referencing your abstract definition. These are abstract, so you can't reference things directly except through extends. And what I'm trying to avoid with this is that you have class polymorphism, so that you can go and reference address base, and then you have to be able to go and match all street address to it, and you have to address basically all descendants of that of address base to a particular instance. So I'm restricting this, and I'm basically saying no, you can't use address base directly, and the shared definitions are effectively being copied into the extending type. And if you want to have an address, just an address, if you just want to have those definitions, but you want to have them as a concrete type, you can do this by declaring an object that then just extends the base, and that's how you get a concrete type. But this is how can we go and do reuse, but not kind of force the entire all the OOP constructs on everybody. Then there is something that's using the same keyword set, but for what I call add-ins. An add-in is, and this is kind of the foundation for the companion specs and the extension model. I have an add-in called delivery instructions, and that is abstract, and that can go and extend a street address optionally. So this is basically staged to, if you want to have delivery instructions in your type, then you can go and add this. And the street, so when you, and then this schema offers the delivery instructions as this type, as this extension type. You can then go and take in your instance, but also in your meta schema, you can go and say uses, and that will go and pick up the delivery instructions offer. And when it does that, then the delivery instructions get plugged into the street address. So it's not an inheritance, basically at compile an extension where this data, these definitions here become fused into street address. You still are dealing with street address, but it's street address that's fused with this extension which you are adding here. So the entire extension mechanism is based on and companion spec mechanism is kind of based on this this offers and uses mechanism, including the abstract extends a mechanism here, where you have an abstract one that goes that uses extends, and then that plugs in. All right. So one of those extensions, the first of those extensions, is alternate names. Alternate names is uses alt names. I find that a little clunky, I have to admit, but it's I haven't come up with a better name yet, with a better term yet. Alt names is a additional property or additional attribute that's defined that contains a dictionary, and the dictionary has with lang : and then the language code has a way to give effectively a label, an alternate, human readable name for a field. So here you have Vorname in German or Nachname in German for your last name, and a label, human readable form for first name. If you want to have alternate names for JSON serialization, then you can go and also specify that here. So that's the purpose. This purpose field is reserved for JSON to kind of override how you serialize those things. And you would probably need this because I'm restricting the character set for property names and also for class names, such that they map into programming languages. So basically similar to our very good experience with Avro, which is doing exactly that sort of restriction. I'm doing that too for the core spec, so that you only have a ASCII character set and leading underscore but no leading number, so kind of that sort of restriction. But if you need to have something else, if you need to have other characters for your JSON serialization, so when you actually go and take that schema and realize it as the structure as a document, then you can go and override the name that's being used using this JSON alternate name. So alternate names are annotations in the first place, but then they may also be functional for picking up a JSON serializer, which will then go and realize or check that document. I'm also another extension, and that's now we're getting into data quality and also into AI, is scientific units and currencies, and there I'm leaning on the relevant standards. Currency is an annotation that's put in the currency symbol. That seems to be very easily confused, and so therefore I'm putting that here as no. This is a euro. This is meant to be in euros, or this is meant to be in dollars, because that's a point of confusion that's fairly common. Similarly, for scientific units, there is a unit extension where you can go and effectively you can go and use the SI units. There's also for you Americans, there's a set of definitions for that has been issued by I forget one of the federal agencies that has all the imperial units defined. I include that too, including then modifiers, and I also have a way to define some compound definitions, like here you see cubic meters. And that's all in there. And then I also have a neutral definition for symbol. If you want to go and define, you just accompany your value with a symbol. There's a symbol definition as well. So this is for better data quality. And what I forgot in the alt name spec, there's also a descriptions definition that works effectively exactly like this. So you can go and have multilingual definitions. And those two specs are primarily really for making the specification richer, and making the schemas richer, because the more context you can give in a schema, the better, for instance, an LLM, but also a data analyst can go and deal with that data. In validation, the validation spec, you will find all of your favorite validation keywords that are in JSON schema. So I didn't remove anything here, but you are turning effectively validation on. You can also turn this on in the meta schema. So you can make a meta schema, and I have defined one that is basically enabling these. And then you have the minimum, maximum, and exclusive maximum, and your min contains and max contains are extending the keyword set with the rules that you are familiar with. And then there's another spec that you can turn on that is called conditionals, that gives you the all of, the any of, the one of, and the not, and the if then else. And if you turn that on, then your schema turns into a pattern, pattern matching mode, effectively, where it's no longer a data definition, because that's impossible with when you use these keywords, but it's really a go and bring me a JSON document, run this against the schema, and then you're effectively checking whether that schema matches all these any of one or all of any of one of rules, and then you the result you get out is a Boolean yes or no, right? That's what you turn this into if you go and turn this on. The documents are currently at this weird location. There's a JSON CS, that's my repo where I play around with these ideas. There is a other spec that's in there, which is a bit less ambitious. That it's the compact schema, which is simply a cut down version of JSON schema. And then just before Christmas, I felt like I should probably try to go and do the whole thing, and then I built the whole thing. But you can go and find that in here. That link is I've also posted all the links to the documents into the mailing list last week for you to go and take a look at. Okay, so questions.
Andy, go ahead.
Andy Newton, incoming art AD, but I'm going to make two comments, one with my hat off, although it's cold in here and my head's going to get cold. I personally like this. I think it's a good thing to do. I do wish it was an ID and not a GitHub repo. I mean, nothing wrong with GitHub repos, but I wish it was an ID. Years ago, when the JSON working group was around, there were attempts to do some JSON schema, JSON DDL things, and that kind of didn't really go anywhere. So I personally hope that this does not stagnate and goes someplace. So I'm going to put my hat back on, A, because my head's cold, and B, I think calling this, we need to be careful with naming, saying this is a variant of JSON schema, or just using quote JSON schema unquote is going to is going to cause a lot of confusion. People are gonna get upset. So I think you need to be careful with the naming. Yet another JSON schema, which is what's on the agenda, is kind of interesting. But we need to be careful that we're not taking the current JSON schema drafts and just trying to iterate on them, unless we are trying to do that. So, and then we might have a question about venue, but the ADs can sort that out, or the chairs. That's it.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, and
So-
it would be nice if this was sent to the ART mailing list, so people outside of this working group who may not have been paying attention to this working group can look at this.
Andy, which particular mailing list? Like art@ietf.org?
Is it art@itf.org? Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. As I said, the name is. I called this new JSON schema mostly as a. I believe it can be a replacement. Of course, I know that there are people have are invested in the current artifact and the way how it is, and it's not that we're like. So I care. What I care about is I care about two things. I care about I need to have something that is not as complicated as the current artifact, so I can go and use it for my as schema language, and it needs to be closely resembling the thing that exists and needs to be discoverable, right? And I need to have something that I can go and lean on, and that other people can lean on in standardization. And having a series of drafts that are sitting out there and are too complicated for anybody to do work with in the context of defining data types and doing code generation with, that's not so. Right now, the state of affairs is not helpful, right? And if we go and make it, something that's super obscure in terms of what the naming is, then it's not discoverable. So I don't know how to solve this, and I'm humbly appearing here as a guest. Effectively, I have not done any work yet in IETF. I don't know what the rules are. I don't know who's toes I'm stepping on, and I hope that I don't show up and people hate me. But I think we need to go and we need to make progress on having a language like this. So I humbly submit this for your consideration, I would say, and I'm open to all suggestions for how we're going to go and make this real.
Removing chair hat and commenting as somebody who's been driving a code generation tool for a number of years, JSON schema is really hard to write reliable code generation stuff off, and we haven't seen a lot of forward progress in the last 5 years on the JSON schema specification from jasonschema.org. I think that partially goes to your point one, Karsten. What's wrong with jasonschema.org? I can't answer that question directly, other than the fact that there has not been a whole lot of momentum despite having people working on it full time.
Yeah. My observation is, and I said that in the beginning, the spec that people are factually using in the wild is from 2018. And it's not any of the later drafts. Like, the later drafts are not very popular if you look at what I'm seeing people bringing and what people are posting in public repositories. It's draft 07 or it's draft 04.
Andy?
Yeah. Again, hat off. I think there's plenty of opportunity to point out what's wrong with JSON schema.
Yes.
And what you just said is a primary example. People are just confused about what they're supposed to be using, right? So, I mean, that right there, in my opinion, is a good enough reason to do something about it.
Just a poll of the room, since this is brand new to most people and also online. Has anyone had a chance to look at this yet in any kind of detail other than Clemens's presentation? I don't see anyone saying yes. I'll suggest that what we do is we put on a list, we ask people to read it, review. We can talk, Daryl and I will talk with the various ADs and see if this were to go forward, where should it go? And then we can come to the group with a proposal, or come to some other group with a proposal, or come to a BOF working group chartering BOF with a proposal. That okay with Mike, Andy? Seem okay? All right. Thank you very much, Clemens. This is really interesting. As someone who years ago did a similar experiment with WSDL.
Oh God!
And the crowd erupts in laughter. Yeah.
So thank you for the opportunity. So in spite of this being in my personal repo, and this being weirdly in a subdirectory of that repo, basically as soon as and I don't know how IETF things work because I've not been here. So thank you for having me. I will be happy to post this and to hand this to IETF if there is interest, and then also to continue working on it. Obviously not solo, but within a proper venue with the collaborators to kind of drive this forward. And I'm not married to any of the pieces that are in these specs. Not insistent. There's some principles here that I probably would go and have a good argument about, but I'm here to basically help.
Appreciate that, your flexibility. Do you want to be involved on the discussions while the IETF figures out where to stick the sausage, or do you want to just get an answer out of us and then we'll ask?
I'll be very happy to just get an answer because you guys know what the politics in this shop are, and I don't.
Okay. Certainly you and Daryl know how to talk to each other. We will reach out to the ADs after this week and see if we can come to a proposal fairly quickly.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good night.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let me bring the agenda back. Do I want to share screen? And just whilst I'm futzing with my screen here, just to address some of the comments in the chat, the folks who originally published the 2012 draft of the IETF are largely not the same folks who have been driving for the last few years, and it was more so the more recent people who didn't want to bring it to the IETF. The primary authors of the 2012 being Henry Andrews and Austin Wright are still interested in it coming to the IETF. It's complicated, but there definitely is interest from some of the original authors of those, the 2012, the 07, 08, 09 drafts who would like it to be an IETF effort, or are prepared to participate in other related JSON schema-like efforts. And I think I'm sharing my screen. Yes, I am. Look at that.
Yep.
Okay. No, not from beginning. Okay. There are several documents that are in the working group that we are asking the question whether or not they should be ready to move to working group last call. Rich or Mike, do you want to speak to HTTP API privacy?
Sure, Mike Bishop, and pointing out no hat because I don't have one yet. So there were a couple of updates to this document proposed at the last IETF. I have been a little busy and I haven't gotten them incorporated in the document. So I would suggest not working group last call until I've done that. But otherwise, I haven't seen much controversy on that. So if the working group is ready to move forward after I have a new version out, I would love to see it go to that stage.
Rich, also no hat. I'll point out that I sort of sketched out something. Mike took it and ran with it, and then I said, "Well, maybe take my name off because I'm a chair and we don't have a conflict." And so now the primary author is an AD, and we'll figure that out. But yeah.
Well,
I agree. Yeah, there's some work to do. Mike, you and I will talk offline. Maybe I can pick up some of the slack.
yeah, and I can have a different AD be the responsible
Of course.
for the document. So
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Which then brings us to digest field problem types. Marius, do you want to take over and share slides?
Yeah. I've just asked for slides.
Yep. Let me stop my screen sharing first.
I'm jealous of your sweater. Cold in here.
Yeah, even though I don't have AC in here. All right, so this is a brief update on the draft for problem types for digest fields. Maybe let me briefly recap what this actually is. So there's RFC 9530 introducing digest fields, and that means any HTTP message, so requests and responses, can include fields about specifying the digest of the representation or the entire content. For example, for the example on the right-hand side, you can see it's a representation digest of this small JSON object in that case. And those are really nice because now we have a standard way of communicating digests, which is really great. But we don't have any standard way of communicating issues with them, like if they don't match at all. Luckily for that, we have another RFC, which provides a framework for problem details. Those are broad and new introduced, so this isn't like a hugely adopted concept yet, but it's a really nice one. It provides a machine readable description of problems. They can even be serialized in different formats and allow us to add additional details. And this draft basically puts them together. So for example, if you have a service that validates digest fields and you notice that they don't match, then you can use one of the problem types proposed by this draft to communicate this issue. So for example, we have a request where the digest is taken from the first slide, but the representation obviously changed. So now the server responds with an according problem type. So that's all written in the draft currently. I think we all agree that this is sensible to do in some form. I think since the last IETF, there's been a few changes that I think we should make noticeable. Looking at this example on the right-hand side, you notice that it includes the calculated digest, which is nice for debugging, but opens the door for Oracle attacks and leaks information. And I'm not a security person, but I've been told that this isn't good practice and this will likely cause problems. So it's probably a good way to remove it. And as long as I've opened a small PR for this, and as long as I don't hear any objection to this, I think this is probably a good way to go. And might also be something that would be brought up during a review by the security directorate. So let's just do it now until we run into this issue later, unless people tell me that this is actually safe, and I will listen to them. Talking about this, I'm not sure, like this entire document touches on like a lot of topic of Oracle attacks. I think that was brought up the last ITF a lot. So I think it might make sense to get in a review from the security directorate as soon as possible, or like not as soon as possible, as rather sooner than later. So we make sure there's no major issues before moving too far away with this document. Talking about things from the last ITF, Justin had a really great presentation about HTTP message signatures at the last ITF. Basically, to just sketch it, digest fields just give you integrity for representation and the message content, not the message itself, like its headers, its method, the target, URI. That's done by message signatures. They're not exclusive, but they like complement each other if you want to have it. I can really recommend only the recording from the last ITF meeting if you haven't been there. It's really great, really helpful. And the idea was that there's some technical overlap between digest fields and signatures, so maybe we can reuse some of the problem types that we defined for digest fields for message signatures as well. And I think we discussed it a bit, and we didn't really come to a conclusion. So I want to present my conclusion that I came to and see how the working group feels about this, since this is an adopted document. I would rather say, okay, let's keep problem types for message signatures out of this draft, simply for the reason that signatures are much more complex than digest fields. Digest fields just take representation content, pipe it into a hashing algorithm, and then you get the digest out of it. Signatures are much more complex in that you first have to like normalize the message, and then you also have to get in the key in the format. So they're much more complex in scope. Justin last time also brought this point home that you have to be much more careful with what error types or problems you expose when dealing with signatures, because you don't really want to open yourself up to Oracle attacks. And so I also don't, as an editor, I don't feel too confident in its space, to be honest. It's not something that I dedicate my career to. So I would rather say, okay, maybe let's put this into a separate draft if there's interest in problem types for message signatures. And particularly also because while there's an overlap between digest fields and signatures, a message can contain both. So we also would need some way to like distinguish, well, if you have a problem with mismatching digest or signatures, you have to tell apart, is it a signature or is it a digest problem? So you might even just end up creating two different problem types for that. But then we're not reusing problem types that we already have. So I think it might also just make sense to put this in a separate document and make sure that people more experienced than I look at it. But this is just my current conclusion. It would also allow us to move the document forward. But yeah, I'm open to hear feedback from the working group about this, how they feel about this.
Have you and Justin chatted about it at all yet?
We chatted about it after the last ITF a bit, yeah. And at that point, I realized that I understand way too little about signatures. To be honest.
Does anyone in the room have an opinion as to whether or not we want to add support for message signatures to the problem types here. I mean, an invalid digest is definitely one of the error types that can happen with a signature. And so, Justin, go.
Yeah, so I think it makes sense for the signature errors to be kept separate. I don't think that there's a lot that can be reused directly. They are related to each other, but only in so much as that they're really designed to be used together. They are really talking about different things. You can have a message that has a perfectly valid signature over an invalid digest, and that is a distinct enough error case that we actually call it out in the signatures RFC, because that's it's kind of an easy naive mistake to make for an implementer. The Oracle attacks for signing over the message are pretty significant in that there's a lot more weird things that can go wrong, like your key lookup can go wrong, your message tagging can go wrong. There's extensibility in the spec that there's not in the digest spec by design. And so while I think it's worthwhile to define some of these error codes that would be reusable across APIs, I think that's overall that's a good idea. It would need to be very considered, and would in fact need to do something alongside of the stuff for digests.
Okay, given that and Marcus's view, does anyone strongly feel that we should work on adding signature types to this document?
To forward a comment from Lucas from the chat, he has a co-author on this draft as well, says that he could live with separate drafts.
I'm sorry, he could live with, well, I can look at the chat. Okay. All right, Marcus and Lucas, I guess you have your direction from the working group as to what to do. And thank you, Justin.
Yeah, thank you again, Justin, for the input. And I will be also open to collaborate on a draft for problem types for message signatures, if there's interest in that. But thank you.
Thanks, Marius. And that brings us to actually a little bit of, a down note at the end of this excellent session so far. We have a couple of expired documents. There has not been a whole lot of activity on these in a while, and although we poked the authors on the list, they remain expired. If there are anybody who feels enthusiastic about bringing some life back into these, please have a chat with us and we'll get you in touch with the existing authors and maybe we can bring some life back. Otherwise, we'll probably have to have a conversation about whether or not we should not continue with these. Actually, I don't know what the process is, Rich. We've never actually had to give up on a document before.
Yeah, there's a button on the data tracker where we can say, forget about this doc. I mean, maybe we just leave it as expired for a bit and see. You know, it's a volunteer organization and people get real world things interrupt. So we should ping the authors and see if they're interested but busy or just not interested. We will do that. But yes, as Darrell said, if anyone is interested in working on it, let us know.
And with that, it brings us to our any other business. Does anybody have any topics they would like to bring up before we close for the day? Silence.
Okay, it's a the phrase standing move to adjourn, as in people are headed for the doors. Thanks, Darrell, for running the meeting It's some goodness hour.
No, it's not bad. It's not even midnight yet. Still 1 minute to go before midnight.
Gotcha. Yeah, Clemens deserves the hero's welcome, and Marius.
Yes.
Okay, thank you all very much for participating. I'll get the draft minutes out on the list. People can look at them, make corrections, and have a good rest of the week. Thank you.
Keep the feedback coming. Bye, folks.